My main interest in skepticism is religion, and although this talk is on logical fallacies, I'm sure I will not run dry of religious examples. I should actually verify a little bit more. Logical fallacy. A fallacy is a mistake in reasoning, either logically or rhetorically, in an argument. So, just saying it's a logical fallacy. You might as well just say it's a fallacy. They kind of divide them up a little bit differently, too. It's informal and formal. A formal fallacy would be when there's actually something wrong with the structure of the argument, a flaw within the structure of the argument. Informal fallacy is when it's dealing with the content or when you're using the wrong argument to prove something, usually something that's false to begin with. But I'm not just going to be talking about listing off fallacies. This is a little more about how we have discussions with people, usually people that commit these fallacies. And I'm hoping that it's good tools to be able to spot different fallacies, as well as know the names of each of these fallacies, and I'll get to why that is in a minute. When you're having a discussion with someone, and they've made this mistake and you've pointed out this mistake, it can be very painful for them. We've all, I'm sure, had it happen to us, and it can be quite embarrassing, which is why I'm not exactly looking forward to the questions afterwards. But when someone's placed in this embarrassing situation, they always try to save face. So what they'll usually do is end up rewording the exact same fallacy that they just committed, and eventually that leads to maybe an ad hominem attack. Ad hominem, that's a fallacy. It's when you attack the individual instead of the individual's argument. But the problem with this is you get into this thing, and either that, okay, they'll try to save face, or the argument will end, or they'll change topics and they'll say, oh, whatever, but what about this, huh? How do you explain this? That's a common sentence you'll probably hear. The problem is they haven't accepted the mistake that they've made before they moved on. And it's completely understandable when someone's been embarrassed to, ignore the thing that reminds them of this painful experience. The problem is they usually do that long after a debate or a discussion is over. And so I think people would feel a lot better if when you point out a fallacy, if you let them know that it's a common fallacy. Everyone has gone through this before. They've been around for hundreds of years. They have Latin names. And I think anytime someone says, it's a common mistake, a mistake so common that it even has a name. So that's kind of why it's helpful to learn this, because, anytime you deliver bad news, the more comforting you can do it, the more likely the person's going to accept the truth of that bad news. Plus, even if you don't walk away with that from today, you can always be watching TV and be like, hey, that's a post hoc fallacy, I know. Post hoc fallacy. Or the Latin phrase, post hoc ergo propter hoc. It's the mistaken thinking that one event was caused by the event that preceded it. I think I'm going to try to come up with a religious example for every one of these, just because I said that before. So I was talking with these Catholic schoolgirls, long story. And one of them, near the end of the talk, one of them kind of broke down, and she was very emotional, talking about how a relative had died didn't die in the hospital, was very sick, and they all prayed that he would get better, and he survived. Miraculously, he survived. And of course, they said, if it wasn't for us praying, he wouldn't have got better. How do you deny something like that? And of course, I explained that's a post hoc fallacy. Post hoc ergo propter hoc. See, because if I throw a stone in a swimming pool and the doorbell rings, myself throwing that stone in the pool didn't cause the doorbell to ring just because the doorbell rang immediately after. This was a bit of a gross example, but I think she got the point. But that's what's called an informal fallacy, the post hoc one. I should actually talk just a bit about propositional fallacies. They're all formal ones. I shouldn't even bother with the formal, informal. You can look that up later. Do it. But there's kind of three major propositional fallacies. One is called affirming a disjunct. It's the mistake that if one possibility is affirmed to be true, then the others are not. So I always think of this one as kind of like jumping the gun. Kind of, to give an example, a really base example, something says, either this Felix is a cat or Felix is a mammal. Oh, I know Felix is a cat, so therefore Felix is not a mammal. And, wait, I gotta come up with a religious one. Okay, so I was in a class once, and the professor, for whatever reason, was actually asking what our religious affiliations were, because he was talking about ancient Rome. And he's like, well, then what are you if you're not Christian? And then someone said, we're Catholics. And I just thought it was funny. I'm not a Christian. But no, the whole silly idea, I always think of affirming a disjunct as kind of like, you know, if you've given a list of answers, you pick one right away that you know is true, even though there could be option D, which is all of the above. Then there's affirming the consequent. That's the mistake in believing that the consequence of a cause is proof of the cause. Let's say, for example, someone says, if I have the flu, I will have a sore throat. I have a sore throat, therefore I must have the flu. Not necessarily. Because, you know, one... Oh, I gotta come up with a religious one. Anyone know Penn Jillette from Penn and Teller? Yeah. He's, philosophically, he's an atheist. Politically, he's a libertarian. So if I were to say something like, all conservatives are against abortion, Penn Jillette is against abortion, therefore libertarian atheist Penn Jillette is a conservative. So that's affirming the consequent. Oh, actually, I could come up with another one like a rainbow. But anyways, denying the antecedent, that's the third of the propositional fallacies. It's an argument that will state a premise in which there is a condition and a consequent, and state that because the condition didn't occur, therefore the consequent didn't occur. So if you had something like, anyone who attends, if you attend school, therefore you exist. You don't attend school, therefore you don't exist. So it would be something kind of silly like that. So a Christian might say, how would it go? If you're religious, you have moral convictions. You're not religious, how can you have moral convictions? I'm sure we've all heard that one. How much time do I actually have for this, guys? All right, just wondering. Just wondering, because I know we started a tad late. Affirmative conclusion from a negative premises. Well, that's kind of obvious when you make... let me think of a good example. A fundamentalist might make an affirmative conclusion by saying, you know... or someone might hear... You might quote something about a crazy belief of a fundamentalist, deeply religious person, and the other Christian might say something along the lines of, I don't believe something like that. People that believe something like that aren't real Christians. Therefore, I'm a real Christian. No, they're making... Doesn't mean that you're a real Christian just because you don't believe something that someone crazy does, because you're saying something's affirmative to... Anywho, I'm going to actually skip ahead, just because I know I don't... The end half of this is much longer. Informal fallacies. The by far most popular one that I've usually heard is the argument from ignorance. And again, as I was mentioning before, the whole debate thing, when you're discussing something with someone, every time I've brought up this argument from ignorance, I've had to take the time to explain that it doesn't mean the person who made the argument is ignorant. The argument from ignorance is assuming that a claim is true because it hasn't been proven false, or that a claim is false because it hasn't been proven true, or that a claim can't be proven false, so therefore it's true, or it can't be proven true, therefore it's false. So this one you can definitely hear religious examples of. The ones most common, usually, and you always find the word absolute truth coming in here. Well, you can't prove either of them true. You can't prove it true either way. Therefore, the idea I like the best is true. Or you can't prove that God doesn't exist. Therefore, God exists. The problem with that is I could say, well, you can't prove God does exist. therefore God doesn't. There's a flaw with both of those. You can't get that conclusion from that premise. And I don't know if this is actually still part of the argument from ignorance, but what tends to follow is something along the lines of, you can't prove either way, therefore my opinion is just as valid as yours. And I haven't been able to actually find in any logician dictionary if there's actually like a false equalism fallacy, but I think it is rooted in the argument from ignorance, where just because two opinions could both be wrong doesn't mean there is an equal likelihood of them being wrong. And chances are one is much higher to be wrong. That's also done. It's similar to the false dilemma or the false dichotomy, which is also an informal fallacy. Which is when two alternate statements are held as if they are the only possible opposing statements that exist. And I usually think of the creationism versus evolution debate. Debate? Not really. Argument. But, of course, clearly you have... even if they were to prove that evolution was wrong at some point, that does not mean that, therefore, creationism is right. In fact, there's pretty much no evidence in that particular example. Okay, so let me just kind of get to the beef of what I was trying to talk about. Because the person that you're having the discussion with, the person that has committed these logical fallacies, it's important that they know, not just you know, and are able to spot these and name these, that they know. Oh, by the way, argument from ignorance, if you just want to go by the Latin name, it's like argumentum ad ignorantium. And you can say it with a weird accent, and they'll think, oh, what is that? But it's important that they know. And I urge you never to let a discussion end before they both know that they've made the mistake, acknowledge that they made the mistake, and most of all, know that it's okay that they made the mistake. I certainly want to see that in practice a lot more. I've noticed in the skeptical community there's been a bit of a debate about how nice one should be when arguing with someone that's being illogical or non-skeptical. Some people say we should be nice even if someone doesn't deserve it. Some people say, if someone holds a ridiculous belief, then by definition, that's a belief worthy of ridicule. So we have to decide between what's fair and what may yield results. So I guess I'll close my statement with a bold claim. When we're deciding between choosing what we ought to do versus what's practical, if both have the same moral goal, go with the one that yields results. Thank you. Any questions? The first speaker never has questions. Well, I guess we'll use this time then to get back on track. Thank you very much. Oh, awesome.
Sometimes debating with people or arguing, I'll notice that the argument that I think we're having is about what is true. After talking to the person, I'll notice that the argument maybe tends to be more about what the person identifies closely with, so that their feeling upset does not have to do much with the reason as it does have to do with what kind of a person they are. And so to admit that something is right or wrong has way less to do with truth, way more has to do with just like a feeling of who they are as a human. So when you want to be nice or truthful, that you're dealing not just with answers, you're dealing with like the core of that person. So trying to approach something which you see as the truth, but seeing it also having to do with who they are as a human, I find that's a bit difficult territory to wade into.
It really is, and that's why I think anytime you're presenting someone with something truthful that goes against what they feel, that they believe, you should really be as comforting as you can possibly be. And that was pretty much the main argument of my talk. Plus it was fun in the middle with all the logical fallacies.
I just want to comment on that a moment if I could. I think we've all felt that in the past. I know I've been wrong a lot. A lot, right? But it's really important, I think, to try... like, I can't control really what other people are feeling when I disagree with them. And they may feel like they're being attacked as a person when I'm really discussing what their position is on something. But if you, when somebody does that to you, if you just try to identify not with what you believe, but with why you believe it, and try to focus not on being right in this instance, but on being open to the idea that you might be wrong, and on wanting to focus on the skeptical process by which you arrive at your beliefs, I think that you'll feel like you're under attack a lot less.
Alrighty.
When this goes up on YouTube, can we call it Spoonful of Sugar?
Sure. It says it right there. Oh, check out that video on the side. Recommended videos. Oh, don't do that one. That's Rick rolled. Mm-hmm. All right. I guess I'll do more. Or no? All right.